Good evening and welcome to the Interactive Grimoire. Tonight's question: what is the nature of the Egyptian conception of the soul? In discussing Egyptian ideas about the soul, it must first be understood that while everyone agrees that the Egyptians saw the soul as having several distinct components, there is no agreement as to what those components were, or exactly how many components were involved. Some say that the Egyptian soul had 5 parts, others that it had 7 or 8 parts, and some say that the Egyptian soul had 9 parts. Moreover, because of the extreme longevity of Egyptian civilization, at least 4,000 years from the dawn of dynastic civilization to the coming of Christianity, Egyptian ideas about these differing components underwent changes over time, so that the same beliefs current at the dawn of Egyptian civilization were not necessarily current at its denouement. Therefore, the comments which follow must be viewed as being rather broad and reflective of my own opinions. Just as any other analysis of the subject is necessarily influenced by the opinion of its author, in the absence of a conclusive statement by the Egyptians themselves. It has often been said that the Egyptian view of the soul is very alien to the modern mind. In my opinion, this is because of a typically Judeo-Christian, overly literal interpretation of just how separate the Egyptians viewed the soul's different components as being. Certainly in metaphysical circles, the idea that the soul has several components is not alien at all. As pagans, we quite naturally speak of our higher self, our astral self, our younger self, our conscious self, etc. We think of these as being different aspects of our soul, of which in many cases we are not fully conscious, but we never think of them as being disconnected entities. I see no reason why this should have been any different for the ancient Egyptians. In fact, it is my opinion that Egyptian ideas about the soul were in fact remarkably similar to modern ideas about the soul. Most lists of the parts of the Egyptian concept of the soul include the following: the Khat, the Sahu, the Kaibet, the Ab, the Ren, the Ka, the Ba, the Ku, and the Sekhem. Each of these aspects of the soul had a specific nature, about which, again, there is often much disagreement. The Khat was understood to be the physical body itself, the corpse which was, if at all possible, mummified and preserved in the tomb. It is often asserted that the Egyptians believed that it was essential to preserve the body if the soul were to enjoy eternal life, though this seems to be something of an overstatement. The Egyptians did place great importance upon the preservation of the body, it is true. However, the idea that if the body were not preserved, or were later damaged or destroyed, the soul would lose its afterlife, does not appear to have been how the Egyptians actually looked at the matter. Rather, the preserved body acted as a kind of key, an anchor for the soul of the deceased, which allowed it to interact with the world of the living as an ancestor spirit, rather than simply moving away from its old identity. The preservation of the body itself was looked at as the ideal for this purpose, but other alternatives existed, notably images of the deceased, which played the same role. So long as an image of the deceased remained, or even the deceased's written name, they could still manifest through it. This belief that a spirit could manifest through an image is one reason why so many ancient images were destroyed by early Christians. The term Sahu seems to have referred to the energetic body. Where the Khat was recognized as dead and subject to decay, the Sahu was manifest in the spiritual realms and continued to flourish after death. The Kaibet, also termed Shayut, is described as the shadow of the deceased, and was depicted the same way, as a black figure resembling a shadow. What the Egyptians believed about the Kaibet is equally shadowy, but it is assumed that it was similar to the Hebrew Qliphoth and the Roman Umbra, a kind of emotional remnant or impression of the deceased, which was essentially reactive in nature. The Ren was the name, by which is meant the persona of the deceased. Like the Khat, the preservation of the Ren was considered extremely important. It was believed that the identity of the soul would remain intact as long as the Ren was remembered. The Ab is the heart, which was considered the center of intelligence and identity by the ancient Egyptians. In this sense, the Ab is very similar to the Ren, and they might be looked upon as being private and public aspects of the persona. It was the Ab which was weighed during the psychostasia, the most famous image of the Egyptian afterlife. This was the weighing of the heart against the feather of Ma'at, or truth. If the heart were light, the soul was judged worthy to move on into Kertneket, the paradise of Osiris. If the heart were heavy, weighed down with misdeeds, it was eaten by the monster Amamet. The Ka is sometimes described as the double of the person, and is represented by a pair of upraised arms. The Ka has also been described as the vital force which animated the person in life, and survived with persona intact after death. The word Ka itself means bull, which suggests that the Ka was seen as embodying a vital spiritual power. The Ka was conceived as being exactly like the person, or perhaps a more perfect form of the person, and is the chief object of mortuary ritual attention. The Egyptians believed that all things had a Ka, not only humans and animals, but also plants and stones and elements such as water. Gods were also spoken of as having Kas. The person and their Ka were closely associated. There is a famous image from the mortuary temple of the female pharaoh Hatshepsut, often mentioned in association with the Ka. The image shows the god Khnum with his potter's wheel, forming the princess Hatshepsut and her Ka at the same time, identical in every respect. The Ka was part of the person, but could leave the body during sleep or in trance. After death, the Ka was thought of as inhabiting the tomb. Special Ka chapels were built for it, where mortuary offerings would be made. It was believed that the Ka would partake of the offerings, consuming not the physical offering, of course, but rather being nourished by virtue of the offering's own Ka. In addition to paying their respects to the Ka through prayers and offerings, people would talk to it and ask for messages in return, which often came in the form of dreams. The Ka chapels were distinguished by an image of the deceased, which is one of the earliest origins of portraiture. Like the body, this Ka chapel image was used by the Ka as a key to communicate with the living. If the body were destroyed, the Ka chapel image alone, or in its lieu other images, would be used as the key. If the mortuary offerings ceased, the Ka was believed to wither and eventually dissipate. This is rather similar to our own idea, that the spirit remains active as an ancestor, as long as it is remembered and worked with, but moves on when this need ceases. The Ba was represented as a human-headed bird. This represented its ethereal nature and ability to fly about at will. The Ba seems to have been regarded as the essential nature of the person, which was within the body during life, but exited at death. It was thought that the Ba enjoyed a wide... Of the components of the Egyptian soul, the Ba is most comparable to the modern idea of spirit or soul. Not only humans, but also gods were spoken of as having a Ba. It was the Ba of the god who manifested through the divine image to commune with worshippers. Interestingly, the theophany or animal form of a god was also described as its Ba. Thus the phoenix, or Bennu, was looked upon as the Ba of Osiris. Similarly, the ram was the Ba of Amun-Ra. Syncretically, the goddess Bast was sometimes spoken of as the Ba of Isis. Both the Ka and the Ba were considered to be united through the Ku. But where the Ku and the Ba were inherently immortal, the Ka was not, dissipating when forgotten by the living. In certain eras, the Ku was thought to reincarnate through the Ba as successive Kas, which each expressed the immortal nature of the Ku and the Ba in differing ways. Finally, we have the Sekhem. The word Sekhem means something like power or magic, and is perhaps closest to the modern word spirit, in that it could be used both in general and particular ways. A person had a Sekhem, but Sekhem was also an impersonal quality. The term Sekhem was sometimes applied to gods and to stars, and certain leading gods, including Ra and Osiris, had among their names Sekhem-Ur, meaning roughly great power. And of course, one of the greatest early goddesses was Sekhemet. The Sekhem was symbolized by a scepter, and the term carries a connotation of rulership. The Sekhem scepter was carried by kings and high officials to denote their imperium. Sekhem scepters were also used by mortuary priests when making offerings, and were associated with the deceased. The Sekhem may be said to be the divine essence, which generated all other parts of the soul. The ultimately mortal Khat, Kaibet, Ren, and Ka, the immortal Ba, and Ku. Thus it will be seen that the ancient Egyptian concept of the soul is in fact not alien at all, but closely parallels our own modern pagan conceptions of the soul. The Khat will be seen to correspond to the physical self, which flourishes for its time, but dies and decays in its turn. The Kaibet, or Shayut, will be seen to correspond to the emotional self, ultimately responsive in nature, reacting to stimuli, just as a shadow reacts to the light which casts it. The outer Ren and inner Ab will be seen to correspond to the mental self, the seat of choice and understanding. The Ka will be seen to be the astral self, able to travel independently, but ultimately an aspect of the given life, which dissipates with time. The Ba is the soul, which is inherently immortal, even though it passes through successive lives. The Ku is the monad or oversoul, which generates the soul and through it, the individual life. And the Sekhem is the divine self, the divine spark, which animates and ultimately unites all things. Thus we see a clear correspondence between our own idea of 7 planes of existence and the Egyptians' concept of 7 aspects to the soul. This has been the Interactive Grimoire. Thank you and have a good night.